The runaway groom. Emma Wallace had never considered herself a woman prone to fantasies. She was practical, methodical, and had built a successful life as a marketing executive in one of Chicago's top firms. But today was different. Today, she allowed herself to believe in fairy tales. The grand ballroom of the Langford Hotel was bathed in soft golden light, the crystal chandeliers sparkling overhead as if the stars themselves had descended to bless her wedding. The air was rich with the scent of fresh white roses, the very ones she had spent weeks selecting. Everything was perfect, just as she had dreamed it would be. Her dress was an elegant masterpiece of satin and lace, hugging her body in all the right places, making her feel like the most beautiful woman in the world. The long train pooled behind her like flowing water, and as she glanced at her reflection in the mirror, she felt the slightest twinge of disbelief. This was real. She was about to marry the love of her life. Lucas Sterling was everything she had ever wanted: charming, ambitious, and deeply intelligent. They had met 5 years ago at an industry gala, where his sharp wit and disarming smile had drawn her in immediately. Their relationship had not been a whirlwind, but a slow, steady burn, one built on mutual respect and admiration. He had proposed on a rooftop overlooking the Chicago skyline, promising her a lifetime of love and devotion. And yet, something felt off. It wasn't cold feet. It wasn't nerves. It was something deeper. Lucas had been distant in the weeks leading up to the wedding. He had buried himself in work, missed cake tastings, and dismissed her concerns with charming but vague reassurances. It wasn't like him to be careless. And yet, every time she voiced her worries, he simply kissed her forehead and told her she was overthinking things. Now, standing in the ballroom, surrounded by friends, family, and everything she had meticulously planned, Emma felt that nagging unease tighten in her chest. She checked her phone. No missed calls, no messages. The wedding was set to start in less than 30 minutes, and Lucas was nowhere to be found. Her maid of honor, Sarah, walked up behind her, offering a comforting squeeze on the shoulder. "Everything okay?" Sarah asked, her voice gentle but laced with concern. Emma forced a smile. "Yeah, just nervous, I guess." Sarah arched a brow. "You don't get nervous. You gave a marketing pitch to a boardroom full of investors last month and didn't even break a sweat." Emma let out a short laugh. "A wedding is different." "True," Sarah agreed, but she still didn't look convinced. A hotel staff member approached, clearing his throat. "Miss Wallace, there's a call for you on the lobby line." The groom. Emma's stomach dropped. Why wasn't he here? She gave Sarah a wary glance before lifting her dress slightly and making her way down the long, elegant hallway toward the lobby. The receptionist handed her the phone. "Lucas," she said, her voice softer than she had intended. A pause. Then a voice she barely recognized. "Emma." Her chest tightened. "Where are you?" "The ceremony starts soon," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. Another pause. Then the words that would shatter everything. "I'm not coming." The world seemed to tilt. Emma's breath caught in her throat, her pulse a deafening roar in her ears. "What?" she whispered, as if she hadn't heard correctly. "I can't do this, Em," Lucas said, his voice eerily calm. "I thought I could, but I can't. Marriage, it's too much. I have to focus on my career. Don't do this." Emma's voice was hoarse, raw. "Please, we can talk about this." It's already done." A cold finality in his voice. And then, just like that, the line went dead. Emma stood frozen, the phone still pressed against her ear, the dial tone buzzing in her mind like a cruel joke. Her vision blurred as the weight of his words settled in. He was gone, and he wasn't coming back. The aftermath. The next few hours passed in a haze. The guests had been informed, their murmurs filling the air like whispers in a funeral home. Some offered sympathy, others exchanged pitying glances. The tabloids got hold of the story within the hour. Bride left at the altar by business tycoon. And the headlines spread like wildfire. Emma wanted to disappear. Sarah tried to take her home, but Emma refused to move. She stood in the ballroom, staring at the floral arrangements, the empty altar, the untouched wedding cake. It was surreal, like watching a tragedy unfold from the outside, unable to stop it. Her parents were devastated, her father's face red with rage, her mother barely holding back tears. Friends tried to comfort her, but their words meant nothing. Lucas was gone. The man who had promised her forever had abandoned her in the most public, humiliating way possible. By the next morning, her face was plastered across every news outlet. The scorned bride. The woman who had given everything only to be discarded like she meant nothing. She turned off her phone. She shut out the world. She packed a single suitcase and left Chicago without a word. A new beginning. Emma didn't know where she was going, only that she needed to escape. She found herself in a small town outside of Boston, far from the life she had built, far from the memories that haunted her. She rented a tiny apartment above a bookstore, took a job at a modest advertising firm, and tried to forget the name Lucas Sterling. She built a new life from scratch. For months, she barely spoke to anyone outside of work. She didn't date, didn't socialize. She spent her evenings reading, walking by the lake, and avoiding any reminder of the man who had shattered her heart. And then, just as she had started to believe she was putting herself back together, she found out she was pregnant. The 2 pink lines. Emma sat on the edge of the bathtub, staring at the pregnancy test in her trembling hands. 2 pink lines. Her breath came in short, uneven gasps. This wasn't possible. She hadn't even considered the idea. With everything that had happened, with the way her life had crumbled overnight, she had never once thought that she might be carrying a part of Lucas with her. A wave of emotions crashed over her. Shock, fear, confusion, and beneath it all, something unexpected. Hope. She pressed a hand to her stomach, her fingers trembling. She wasn't alone. For the first time since that awful day, a new kind of strength settled in her bones. Lucas may have left. He may have broken her in ways she never thought possible. But she would not break. She would not let this define her. She had lost everything once before. But now she had something worth fighting for. And nothing, absolutely nothing, would take that away from her. Rising from the ashes, a decision that changed everything. Emma Wallace never thought she would find herself in this situation, alone, pregnant, and utterly unprepared. She had spent years crafting the perfect life, building a career that made her proud, falling in love with a man she believed was her forever. And yet, here she was, sitting on the edge of a cheap motel bed in a town she had never planned to stay in, staring at the 2 pink lines on a pregnancy test. Her fingers tightened around the small plastic stick, her heartbeat echoing loudly in her ears. She was going to be a mother. The reality of it hit her like a tidal wave. She wasn't ready. She had no plan, no support system. She had spent months running from the humiliation Lucas had left her with, only to now be permanently tied to him through the life growing inside of her. For a long time, she just sat there, numb. She thought about all the possible options. She could call her parents, but she already knew what they would say. Her father would tell her to come home, to let him fix everything like he always did. Her mother would be worried sick, pushing her to reconsider keeping the baby, asking her if she really wanted to raise a child alone. But she wasn't that girl anymore. She wasn't the Emma who needed rescuing. She had lost everything once, but this was her chance to rebuild. With trembling fingers, she placed a hand over her stomach. "You and me, baby," she whispered. "We're going to be okay." And just like that, her decision was made. She wasn't going back. She wasn't going to ask for help. She was going to stand on her own, raise this child with the strength she had found in herself, and make sure they never felt the kind of abandonment she had felt that day in the ballroom. No matter what it took, she would give this baby the life they deserved. The struggles of a new life. Emma knew that starting over wouldn't be easy. The first few months were the hardest. She found a small rundown apartment in the outskirts of Boston. It wasn't much, just a one-bedroom unit with outdated appliances and creaky wooden floors, but it was hers. She kept her job at the small advertising firm, but morning sickness made it nearly impossible to get through the long hours without running to the restroom. She had to work twice as hard to prove she was still valuable, knowing that at any moment they could find someone younger, someone without baggage, to take her place. The exhaustion was relentless. She would wake up before dawn, push through work, then collapse into bed before the sun had even set. Some nights she cried herself to sleep, overwhelmed by the weight of it all. But she never regretted her decision, not once. She started going to doctor's appointments alone, listening to the steady heartbeat of her baby during ultrasounds, feeling the first tiny flutters of movement inside her. She bought baby books, watched parenting videos, and prepared herself for the moment she would finally hold her child in her arms. Still, the fear never fully left her. Would she be enough? Could she do this alone? She had no answers, but she had no choice but to try. A blast from the past. One evening, after a long day at work, Emma stopped by a small cafe to grab a tea. The exhaustion had been hitting her harder lately, and she needed something warm to calm her nerves. She had just stepped up to the counter when she heard a familiar voice behind her. Emma. Her body tensed. She turned slowly, her heart stopping for a split second. Standing there, just as polished and put together as ever, was Victoria Langford. Emma's stomach clenched. She hadn't seen Victoria in years, but she knew exactly who she was. The woman Lucas's parents had always wanted him to marry. Wealthy, poised, and completely ruthless when it came to getting what she wanted. Victoria looked her up and down, her eyes pausing briefly on Emma's swollen belly before a slow smirk spread across her lips. Wow. So the rumors were true, Victoria mused, sipping her expensive latte. You're pregnant with Lucas's baby. Emma squared her shoulders, refusing to let Victoria see her flinch. It's none of your business. Victoria chuckled, shaking her head. Oh, but it is. You see, Lucas's parents won't be happy about this. An illegitimate child. That's not exactly a good look for the sterling name. Emma clenched her fists. I don't care what they think. Victoria tilted her head, her smirk growing. No, but Lucas will. And when he finds out, do you really think he's just going to walk away? Emma's blood ran cold. Lucas didn't know. She had done everything in her power to disappear, to avoid any chance of him finding out. But now, Victoria leaned in, her voice barely above a whisper. You might think you can hide, Emma, but people like us, we always find what belongs to us. Emma swallowed hard, watching as Victoria sauntered away, leaving her standing in the middle of the cafe, her hands trembling around her cup. Lucas was going to find out, and she had no idea what that would mean for her or her baby. The unexpected visit. Days passed, and Emma's paranoia grew. She kept looking over her shoulder, expecting to see Lucas at every turn. Then, one evening, her worst fear came true. There was a knock at her apartment door. Her heart pounded as she slowly walked toward it, every muscle in her body screaming at her not to open it. But she had to. She twisted the lock, pulled the door open, and there he was. Lucas Sterling stood in front of her, dressed in a tailored suit, his expression unreadable. Emma's breath hitched. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then his eyes dropped to her belly. His entire body stiffened. His jaw tightened. You're pregnant, he said, his voice low, controlled. Emma swallowed hard, forcing herself to meet his gaze. Yes. A long silence stretched between them. Then Lucas took a slow step forward. Why didn't you tell me? Emma lifted her chin, her resolve hardening. Because you left, she said simply, and I didn't need you. Lucas exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. Emma, This changes everything. She crossed her arms. No, Lucas, it changes nothing. You walked away. You don't get to come back now just because you feel guilty. Something flickered in his eyes. Anger, frustration, something else she couldn't quite place. I have a right to be a part of my child's life, he said, his voice sharp. Emma's chest ached, but she refused to let him see it. You had a right to be in my life, too, she said, but you made your choice. Lucas stared at her, the weight of her words sinking in. Then, to her horror, he said the last thing she ever expected. I want custody. Emma's heart stopped. She took a step back, shaking her head. No, you don't get to do this. Lucas's expression was unreadable. I have a legal right. And if I have to, I'll fight for it. Emma's hands curled into fists. She had fought too hard, built too much, to let him take this from her. If Lucas wanted a fight, then a fight was exactly what he was going to get. The war begins. A storm brewing. Emma sat at her kitchen table, gripping the edges so tightly her knuckles turned white. Her world had just been flipped upside down. Again. Lucas Sterling, the man who had abandoned her at the altar, had found her. Not only that, but he had stood in her doorway, looked her in the eyes, and declared that he wanted custody of her child. Her stomach churned with nausea, and this time, it had nothing to do with pregnancy. Custody. Was he serious? He hadn't called. He hadn't checked in. For 9 months, he had been a ghost, living his perfect, glamorous life, untouched by the destruction he had left behind. And now, suddenly, he wanted to play the role of father. Emma's hands curled into fists as she forced herself to take deep, steadying breaths. This wasn't just about her anymore. This was about her baby. And she would do whatever it took to protect them. The call that changed everything. The next morning, Emma sat in her small office at the advertising firm, attempting to focus on her work. But no matter how hard she tried, her mind kept drifting back to Lucas. Would he actually go through with this? Would he drag her through a custody battle just to satisfy some sense of guilt? Her stomach twisted at the thought. Just then, her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, her breath hitching at the name. Lucas. She hesitated for a brief moment before answering. What do you want? Her voice was sharp, cold. A sigh came from the other end. Emma, we need to talk. No, Lucas. We talked last night. You made your intentions clear, and I made mine. You can't just cut me out of this. His voice was controlled but laced with frustration. This is my child, too. Emma pressed her fingers against her temples. You don't get to show up 9 months later and suddenly care. You think I don't care. Lucas snapped. Do you have any idea what I've been dealing with? Emma let out a bitter laugh. You mean, besides abandoning me at the altar and leaving me to deal with this alone? No, Lucas, I don't know what you've been dealing with, because you never told me. There was silence on the line. Then his voice softened. Emma, I made a mistake. Her chest tightened. For a moment, just a brief moment, she let herself believe he was being sincere. Then she remembered. This was Lucas Sterling, the man who had left her in the most humiliating way possible, the man who had chosen to disappear. You don't get to fix this with an apology, she said, her voice firm. I don't need you. And neither does this baby. Another long silence. Then, his next words made her blood run cold. I'm filing for custody. Emma's grip on the phone tightened. You wouldn't dare. I have every right, Lucas said, his voice steel. You may not want me in this child's life, but I will be, one way or another. The call ended. Emma sat there, staring at the screen, her whole body trembling with rage. He had declared war. Fine. If Lucas wanted a fight, he was going to get one. Building an army. Emma wasted no time. She spent the next few hours calling every lawyer she could find, researching every single legal route she had. By the end of the day, she had hired Catherine Blake, one of the toughest family lawyers in Boston. She was in her 50s, sharp-eyed, and had a reputation for tearing men like Lucas apart in the courtroom. When Emma met her at the firm's sleek office, Catherine wasted no time. "Tell me everything," she said, folding her hands on the desk. Emma took a deep breath and spilled it all. How Lucas had abandoned her, how she had built a life on her own, how he had just found out about the pregnancy and was now suddenly demanding rights to the child he never cared about before. Catherine listened carefully, her eyes unreadable. When Emma finished, the lawyer leaned back in her chair, nodding slowly. "He doesn't have a leg to stand on," she said matter-of-factly. "He abandoned you. You've prepared for this child alone. You have a stable home and career. He has no history of being involved in this child's life, and judges don't take kindly to absentee fathers trying to swoop in at the last minute." Emma exhaled, relief washing over her. "So, I don't have to worry." Catherine gave her a sharp look. "I didn't say that. Lucas Sterling is wealthy, powerful, and has a family with serious connections. He will use every resource he has to make himself look like the perfect father. And if he has the right judge, that money might just buy him partial custody." Emma's stomach dropped. "Then what do we do?" she asked. Catherine's lips curled into a smirk. "We fight. Hard." Lucas's next move. Emma barely slept that night. By the time morning came, she felt drained, exhausted, and more determined than ever. She went about her day as usual, ignoring the way her hands trembled whenever she thought about what Lucas might do next. Then, just as she was leaving work, she saw him. Lucas was standing outside her office building, leaning against a sleek black car, looking as effortlessly handsome as ever in a navy suit. Emma's pulse spiked, but she forced herself to stay calm. She walked past him without a word. "Emma," he called, his voice steady. She gritted her teeth but turned to face him. "What do you want?" Lucas studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. "I don't want to fight you." "Then don't," she snapped. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. I want to be involved." Emma let out a bitter laugh. "You should have thought about that before leaving me at the altar." Regret flickered across his face, but she didn't let herself soften. "This isn't about you," she continued. "This isn't about your guilt, or your parents, or your image. This is about my child. And I will not let you come in now and pretend you're some devoted father when you disappeared the moment things got difficult." Lucas inhaled sharply. For a moment, she saw something vulnerable in his expression, something real. But she didn't trust it. Finally, he nodded. "Then I guess I'll see you in court." Emma watched as he climbed into his car and drove away, her entire body rigid with rage. The war had officially begun. The battle lines are drawn. A mother's resolve. Emma sat in her dimly lit apartment, staring at the legal papers spread across her kitchen table. The words blurred together, her mind racing through every possible outcome of the custody battle that now loomed over her like a dark storm cloud. Lucas wasn't bluffing. He had money, resources, and a family name that carried weight in courtrooms. And despite his absence for the entirety of her pregnancy, the law still acknowledged his rights as the biological father. Her stomach churned. She ran her fingers gently over her baby bump, feeling the small, reassuring movements inside her. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for her child. And she would not lose. Taking a deep breath, she picked up her phone and dialed Catherine Blake, her lawyer. The woman answered on the second ring, her voice sharp and professional as ever. "I was expecting your call," Catherine said, skipping any pleasantries. "Did you get the paperwork?" "Yes," Emma replied, gripping the edge of the table. "What do we do?" Catherine let out a slow sigh. "First, we prepare. Lucas is going to throw everything he has at this case, his money, his lawyers, and his family connections. We need to prove that you are the more stable parent." Emma exhaled. "How do we do that?" "By making it impossible for the court to side with him." Catherine's voice was unwavering. We build your case so strong that no judge would dare take your child away from you." Emma nodded, determination hardening in her chest. She was ready for war. Lucas's game begins. Over the next week, Emma barely had time to breathe. Catherine had her compiling financial records, gathering witness statements from colleagues and friends, and documenting every step she had taken to prepare for motherhood. She went through every detail of her life with a fine-tooth comb, making sure there were no cracks in her case. Meanwhile, Lucas was making his own moves. The first blow came in the form of a media article. Sterling hair fights for custody of unborn child. Estranged bride unfit to raise baby alone. Emma's stomach twisted as she read the headline. The article painted Lucas as a concerned father trying to do what was best for his child, while subtly hinting that Emma's decision to raise the baby alone was irresponsible. He was trying to manipulate public perception. Anger bubbled inside her. The second blow came in the form of an unexpected visitor. She was coming home from work when she spotted an older woman waiting by the steps of her apartment building. The woman was dressed in an expensive beige coat, a designer handbag slung over her shoulder. Her perfectly styled silver hair and the sharpness in her eyes told Emma exactly who she was. Eleanor Sterling, Lucas's mother. Emma clenched her jaw and squared her shoulders before walking up to her. "Mrs. Sterling," she said coolly, "I wasn't expecting a visit." Eleanor gave her a small, tight-lipped smile. "I thought we should talk. May I come in?" Emma hesitated for only a second before stepping aside. Once inside, Eleanor looked around the modest apartment, her nose slightly wrinkling at the lack of luxury. "I won't waste your time, Emma," she said, setting her handbag down on the table. "I came to offer you a solution." Emma crossed her arms. "I wasn't aware we needed one." Eleanor let out a small, dry laugh. "I understand that you're angry, that you feel betrayed. But this situation can be handled in a way that benefits everyone." Emma's stomach twisted. "What do you mean?" Eleanor's eyes turned calculating. "Lucas is prepared to take full custody of the child." Emma's breath hitched. "Over my dead body." Eleanor sighed, as if she had expected that reaction. "Emma, be reasonable. Lucas can provide a life for this child that you simply cannot. A life of privilege, of opportunity. A name that means something in this world." Emma's blood boiled. "And I can provide love. Stability. A home where my child will always come first, not just be a name on a family tree." Eleanor's lips pressed into a thin line. "You're emotional right now. I understand that, which is why I'm offering you a way out." She reached into her handbag and pulled out a document, sliding it across the table. Emma stared at it, confused. "This is a settlement agreement," Eleanor explained smoothly. "Sign it, and you'll receive $5 million. In exchange, you relinquish all parental rights to the child." Emma's breath caught. Her hands shook with fury as she stared at the papers. "You want me to sell my baby?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Eleanor's expression didn't change. "I want what's best for the child." Emma stood abruptly, slamming her hands on the table. "Get out." Eleanor didn't flinch. "You don't have to struggle, Emma," she said, standing as well. "You don't have to work yourself to exhaustion, wondering if you'll be able to provide for this baby. $5 million is more than enough to start fresh, anywhere in the world." Emma's vision blurred with rage. "My baby is not for sale," she hissed. "And if you ever come near me again with this kind of offer, I will make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of family the Sterlings really are." For the first time, a flicker of something like respect crossed Eleanor's face. Then, just as quickly, it was gone. She picked up her handbag, smoothed her coat, and walked to the door. Before leaving, she turned one last time. "War isn't won by emotion, Emma. It's won by power. And my family has more of it than you could ever imagine." Then she was gone. Emma sank into a chair, pressing a hand to her stomach. This wasn't just a custody fight anymore. This was a full-blown war. And the Sterlings had just made their first move. The turning point. By the next morning, Emma was sitting in Catherine's office, relaying every detail of the conversation. The lawyer listened carefully, her face unreadable. When Emma finished, Catherine let out a slow breath. "That was a warning," she said. "They're testing you. They want to see if you'll break." Emma's jaw clenched. "Then we hit back." Catherine smiled. "That's what I like to hear." She leaned forward, pulling out a folder. "This is what we're going to do. First, we're going to expose the truth. We'll gather every record, every witness who can confirm that Lucas knew about this pregnancy and still walked away. We'll paint the real picture of a man who abandoned his child and is now using his family's power to take them away." Emma nodded, her pulse racing. "Second, we go public. If the Sterlings want to use the media, we'll fight fire with fire. We'll tell your story, your truth. The world will see you as the strong, independent mother fighting to protect her baby, while Lucas and his family look like the manipulators they are." Emma's lips curled into a determined smile. "And third," Catherine said, her eyes gleaming, "we dig. The Sterlings have secrets. I guarantee it. We'll find them. And when we do, we'll make sure they regret ever thinking they could take your child away from you." Emma exhaled sharply. For the first time in days, she felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel. Hope. Lucas and his family thought they could control everything. But they had underestimated her. She was done playing defense. It was time to fight back. Striking back. A mother's fury. Emma Wallace had never been one to back down from a fight. But this wasn't just a fight. It was war. Lucas Sterling and his family had underestimated her. They thought she would break, that she would take their hush money and walk away, that she would let them steal her child, just because they had money and power. They were wrong. She sat in Catherine Blake's office, her fingers clenched into fists as the lawyer went over the plan. "We're going to hit them where it hurts," Catherine said, flipping through a thick file of documents. "The court of public opinion. If Lucas wants to use the media to make himself look like a devoted father, we'll expose the truth, the abandonment, the manipulation, everything." Emma exhaled sharply. "And the legal case." Catherine's lips curled into a satisfied smirk. "I've been digging into Lucas's financial records. His father's business dealings, the family's political ties. There are skeletons in that closet, and we're going to find them." Emma nodded. "Let's do it." A public battle begins. The first move was strategic. Emma reached out to Rachel Carter, an investigative journalist known for exposing corruption among the wealthy elite. Rachel had been looking for her next big story, and when Emma gave her the details, the abandoned bride, the secret pregnancy, the billionaire heir suddenly demanding custody, she was all in. 2 days later, the headline hit the internet. "The woman Lucas Sterling left at the altar fights to protect their child. Is he the father he claims to be?" The article was brutal. It detailed the humiliation Emma had suffered, how Lucas had disappeared when she needed him most, how he had never once checked in during her pregnancy. The narrative was clear. Lucas Sterling was not the devoted father his PR team wanted the world to believe he was. The public ate it up. Comments flooded in, siding with Emma. "She raised this child alone. Why does he think he can just waltz in now? Another rich man trying to control a woman's life. Disgusting. She deserves full custody." End of discussion. Emma scrolled through the responses, feeling the tide shift in her favor. Lucas had the money, but she had the truth. And in the age of social media, the truth was louder than any dollar bill. Lucas fires back. The retaliation came swiftly. Less than 24 hours after the article was published, Lucas's team released a statement. "Mr. Sterling was unaware of Ms. Wallace's pregnancy until recently. He has always acted in good faith and simply wants to be a present father in his child's life. It is unfortunate that this has turned into a public spectacle." Emma scoffed as she read the statement. Catherine snorted. Typical damage control. But here's the thing. His past actions speak louder than his words. Lucas's PR campaign wasn't stopping there. By the next morning, new articles surfaced, questioning Emma's ability to provide for the child. They painted her as a stressed, overworked single mother, while portraying Lucas as the billionaire father who just wanted to give his child a better life. Emma's stomach turned. She knew they would play dirty, but seeing her name twisted in headlines made her blood boil. "They're trying to discredit me," she muttered, gripping the edge of the table. Catherine nodded. "And we won't let them." Unearthing the past. While the media battle raged on, Catherine's team continued to dig into the Sterling's history. What they found changed everything. Catherine called Emma into her office one evening, her eyes gleaming with satisfaction. "We got something," she said, handing over a file. Emma flipped it open, her eyes widening as she read. Lucas's father, Robert Sterling, had been quietly funneling money into offshore accounts for years, hiding millions from tax authorities. But that wasn't the biggest scandal. Robert Sterling had also bribed a judge in a previous family custody case. Emma's heart pounded. "This," she breathed, "this could ruin them." Catherine nodded. "And it will. We just have to time it right." The courtroom showdown. The day of the first court hearing arrived. Emma sat in the courtroom, her hands clasped tightly in her lap as she stared across the aisle at Lucas. He looked composed, his jaw tight, his suit perfectly tailored. But there was tension in his eyes. He knew she had the upper hand. The judge, a stern-looking woman in her 60s, called the room to order. Lucas's lawyer was the first to speak. "Your Honor, my client is merely seeking joint custody. He has the financial means and the stability to provide for his child. Ms. Wallace, while a capable mother, does not have the same resources." Emma clenched her fists. Then Catherine stood. "Your Honor, my client has been the only parent in this child's life. Mr. Sterling abandoned her, ignored her pregnancy, and only showed up when it was convenient. He has no history of caregiving, no record of involvement. He is a stranger to this baby." The judge's expression remained neutral. Lucas's lawyer pressed forward. "Ms. Wallace has engaged in a public smear campaign against my client. It is clear that she is emotionally driven and making decisions based on resentment rather than the child's best interests." Emma's blood boiled, but she kept her face calm. Then Catherine delivered the final blow. "Your Honor, we have evidence that Lucas Sterling's father bribed a judge in a previous custody case." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Lucas's expression darkened. His lawyer immediately objected, but the damage was done. The judge leaned forward, her eyes sharp. "I want to see that evidence." Catherine handed over the documents. Silence filled the room as the judge read. After a long pause, she looked up. "Given the circumstances, I will not be granting Mr. Sterling joint custody at this time. Until further investigation, he will be permitted supervised visits only." Emma let out a slow, shaky breath. She had won this round. But the war wasn't over yet. The final reckoning. The calm before the storm. Emma Wallace sat in her dimly lit apartment, her fingers trembling as she wrapped them around a cup of tea. The courtroom victory from earlier that day had felt like a moment of relief, but she knew better than to think it was over. Lucas Sterling wasn't the kind of man to accept defeat gracefully. Supervised visits, that was what the judge had granted him. For now. It wasn't a complete win, but it was enough to keep him from taking her baby away. Yet even as she tried to steady her nerves, she knew that Lucas and his family weren't done fighting. A war like this didn't end in a single battle. Her phone buzzed. She picked it up, her heart lurching when she saw the message. "Lucas, we're not done, Emma. You should know that by now." She exhaled sharply. He wasn't backing down. She had expected this. She was ready. A new threat emerges. The next morning, Emma met with Catherine in her office. The lawyer was already flipping through a new batch of legal documents. "They're moving fast," Catherine said, tossing a thick folder onto the desk. Lucas has formally filed for primary custody. Emma's stomach dropped. But we just won in court, she said, confused. Catherine nodded grimly. Yes, but now they're changing their approach. Their argument, you're unstable. Emma blinked. Excuse me. They're claiming that the stress from the public exposure, the media frenzy, and your financial situation make you an unfit mother. Catherine leaned back, rubbing her temples. They're going for blood. Emma's hands curled into fists. This is ridiculous, she snapped. I have a stable job, a home. Catherine nodded. I know that, and so does the judge. But the Sterlings are playing the long game. They're using the perception of instability. They've even hired a private investigator to dig into your life. Emma's pulse spiked. They're desperate, Catherine added, which means they know they're losing. But that doesn't mean we can afford to relax. Emma gritted her teeth. If Lucas wanted a fight, she would give him one. The breaking point. The next week was a nightmare. Emma could feel eyes on her wherever she went. At work, a strange man loitered outside the building, pretending to be on his phone. When she went to the grocery store, she spotted the same car parked outside as when she left her apartment that morning. The private investigator. They were watching her, waiting for her to slip up. Catherine had warned her to be extra careful. No arguments in public, no stress-related breakdowns. They would use anything against her. Then, the worst happened. She was leaving work late one evening when a woman approached her, a reporter. Emma Wallace. The woman asked, voice sharp, eager. I'm with the Tribune. I was wondering if you'd like to comment on the photos of you taken outside a bar last night. Emma's blood ran cold. What? The reporter smirked and pulled out her phone, showing her the image. Emma gasped. It was a doctored photo of her, looking as if she were stumbling out of a bar, disheveled, with a drink in her hand. But she hadn't been at a bar. She had been home. Emma's stomach twisted in horror. The Sterlings were fabricating evidence. She turned on her heel and stormed into Catherine's office the next morning. They're setting me up, she said through gritted teeth. Catherine slammed the fake photos on the desk. This is illegal. They're trying to frame you as an unfit mother. We can take this to court. Emma took a deep breath. I don't just want to defend myself, Catherine. I want to end this. Catherine nodded. Then we expose them. The truth comes out. Emma and Catherine moved quickly. They launched a counterattack, a lawsuit against the private investigator for harassment, a subpoena for security footage proving she was not at the bar that night, and a full media expose on the Sterling family's dirty tactics. Then the bombshell dropped. One of the Sterling's former employees came forward with a leak. A Sterling family lawyer had been the one who paid to have Emma's photo doctored. And there was proof. Emails, transactions, even a witness. The moment the evidence hit the internet, the public turned against Lucas. The sympathy he had worked so hard to cultivate vanished overnight. Now, the world saw him for what he really was, a man who had tried to destroy the mother of his child to get his way. The final court battle. By the time they walked into court for the final custody hearing, everything had changed. Lucas sat stiffly beside his lawyers, his jaw clenched. He looked defeated. Emma, on the other hand, felt stronger than ever. The judge reviewed the damning evidence against the Sterling family, the harassment, the fabricated photos, the bribery. Then she turned to Lucas. Mr. Sterling, she said, her voice sharp, your actions throughout this case have been deceitful and unethical. You have demonstrated a clear pattern of manipulation and coercion. As such, I see no evidence that you have the best interests of the child at heart. Lucas's face paled. The judge took a deep breath and delivered her verdict. Full custody is awarded to Ms. Wallace. Mr. Sterling's visitation rights will be strictly limited and supervised. Emma's breath hitched. She had won. Her child was safe. Lucas Sterling had lost. The aftermath. Lucas didn't say a word as he left the courtroom. His mother, Eleanor, shot Emma one last withering glare before following her son out the doors. But Emma didn't care. She had fought for her child. And she had won. That evening, she sat on her couch, her hands resting on her belly. A new chapter was beginning. Not one defined by betrayal, heartbreak, or court battles, but one filled with hope, love, and a life she had built on her own terms. Her child would grow up knowing they were wanted, loved, and fiercely protected. And no one, not Lucas, not his family, would ever take that away from her. As she felt a soft kick from inside her belly, she smiled. "We did it, baby. We're free."